What's going on, guys? It's me, Zach, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. In this one, I'm going to finish up our series where we go over all of the off-season recaps for each team in the NFL. This will be finishing up with the AFC East here, so if you haven't taken the time to watch any of the other 7 videos where I touched on each other division, please do take a minute to go look over those. I think they're going to be really helpful in terms of helping make sure that you're up to date on what's happened this offseason and how it's going to shape the fantasy landscape in 2023. Today is Wednesday, April 26th. So we've got the NFL draft officially starting tomorrow, so that's super exciting. So I wanted to get all these videos done before that happens, so that we could really dive into a draft recap and dynasty content starting right after that. So it's been super exciting. I saved the AFC East for last, and I think you'll understand why when I touch on the New York Jets. But been really excited to make this one as well. So yeah, let's get into the first video. So starting us off here with the New England Patriots, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot that changed for this team from last year to this year. They added Mike Gesicki to sort of fill the void from having traded John Smith to the Atlanta Falcons. They added James Robinson to sort of backfill for Damian Harris departing to the Buffalo Bills, and they added Juju Smith-Schuster to sort of backfill for losing Jacoby Myers and Nelson Aguilar. In general, I don't think they really made any sort of improvements to their team. I think that Mike Gesicki is pretty much a wash compared to John Smith. I think that James Robinson is a bit of a downgrade actually from Damian Harris. I think Juju is probably a downgrade from Jacoby Myers as well. Losing Nelson Aguilar does maybe open up things a little bit for Tyquan Thornton to be a more useful fantasy asset this season. He's probably not going to pan out there, but he does have that high draft capital, and he's certainly a really athletic specimen. So it's possible that he has a breakout this season. I think though in general there's not going to be a true number one wide receiver on this offense, and there's not really going to be a true number one tight end either between Gesicki and Hunter Henry. So this is going to be an offense that's going to piece together receiving yards from multiple players. So I don't think there's going to be any true standouts from a fantasy perspective here. Mac Jones has been the subject of trade rumors as well this offseason. It'll be interesting to see what the Patriots do in the draft. I do believe that if they were to just move on from Mac Jones, they would just be playing Bailey Zappi probably. So nothing really too much is going to change from the quarterback position. And if there's any takeaway from me, really, it's that Ramondre Stevenson's in line for an even larger workload this season than he had last year. Then bringing in James Robinson to me really is a sign they're not going to look to address the running back position any further in the draft. And that's really great if you're a Ramondre Stevenson stan, just because the Patriots have certainly been a team that's never liked to stick with one running back very long, and I think that James Robinson doesn't represent enough competition to really steal snaps from him. Ramondre's a really talented player. He's a great pass catcher, and he's going to be the best offensive weapon on this team. So Ramondre's got a shot to be a top 5 running back in fantasy next season. Moving on to the Miami Dolphins, this is going to be a team that looks pretty much the exact same as they did last year in all likelihood. They don't have a first-round pick this year because they lost it due to some tampering allegations that came across this team last offseason, so I wouldn't expect them to add any true difference makers this draft. They really didn't lose or gain much on the offensive side of the ball. They re-signed every single running back on the roster. They lost Trent Sherfield at wide receiver and signed Braxton Berrios in free agency, so it's probably a bit of a lateral move there. They lost Teddy Bridgewater as their backup quarterback and added Mike White. Certainly reasonable to assume that Mike White's going to get some starts this year with the injury history we've seen with Tua, and Mike White's certainly capable of being good enough to distribute the ball to these really talented weapons in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. So I think that in general, nothing really changes for this team. They lost Mike Gesicki as well, but he really wasn't involved in this offense as much as he probably should have been. So really, we're going to see Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle both be top 10 receivers. You'll probably see either Jeff Wilson or Raheem Mostert be low-end running back twos this season. I think they're going to split a lot of work, and it's going to be tough to tell. I personally would lean the side of Jeff Wilson just because he's younger and seemed to be the main guy during the couple games they were both healthy for last season, but it's going to be tough to tell. And then as far as that, Tua is going to be a low-end quarterback one with upside because of how explosive these weapons are. And then, really, it's just going to be a rinse and repeat of what we saw from this team last season, and hopefully they can get better health out of the quarterback position. So next we've got the Buffalo Bills. They've been pretty active in free agency given how limited their cap space is. They added Damian Harris at the running back position to sort of backfill from having lost Devin Singletary to the Houston Texans. They signed Deontay Hardy and Trent Sherfield. Trent Sherfield was actually a really nice number 3 wide receiver for the Miami Dolphins last season. I think he could have some nice weeks. And they signed Deontay Hardy, who's honestly he's a burner. He's a really talented kick returner and a guy that I think could be a nice deep league sleeper this next season. He's got really great usage stats in terms of yards per route run. And honestly, I think he's a really talented player. And in this offense, where nobody's really stepped up as a true number 2 for this team, there's certainly an opening there. This has been a team that's linked to being a potential trade candidate for DeAndre Hopkins. We'll see what happens there. But if their wide receiver room stays the same, I'm not really super excited about running it back with Gabe Davis here, so I think there's certainly an opportunity for someone else to step up as that wide receiver 3. And they did lose Isaiah McKenzie, who was that wide receiver 3 for them last season. So there's certainly opportunity here in an offense that really leans very heavily on Stephon Diggs. So there's an opportunity for some receiver here to step up, but in general, I wouldn't bank on it. These are all just sort of late draft flyers. And then, yeah, they lost Isaiah McKenzie and Devin Singletary. I think Damian Harris is a pretty lateral move for them in the running back position. I think he's a bit better as a pure runner than Devin Singletary. And then James Cook's going to be their third down back. This probably just pretty much removes value from the running back position in Buffalo for me. There will be weeks, obviously, where these guys are talented or useful in fantasy just because of how many points this team's going to put up. But Damian Harris is going to get vultured too often by Josh Allen at the goal line to be a true weekly starter just because we know about Damian Harris. He's not a great pass catcher, and the Bills don't really pass the ball to the running backs very much anyway. So Damian Harris is going to need a touchdown to pay off on a week-to-week basis, and Josh Allen's going to vulture too many of those. And then James Cook, with Damian Harris there, I don't think James Cook's going to get the rushing volume you need for him to be useful. And like I said earlier, Josh Allen really doesn't throw the ball to the running backs all that often. So James Cook's going to have some nice explosive games. He's a really explosive player, and I like him, but I don't think he's going to get enough work or usage to actually be a really real fantasy asset this season. And last but certainly not least, we've got the New York Jets. They traded for Aaron Rodgers officially as of yesterday, and they've also added Allen Lazard and Mecole Hardman to sort of round out this wide receiver group. They did lose Elijah Moore in a trade to the Cleveland Browns, but that's not super shocking. He really wasn't a part of this offense last season, and even though he's very talented, I just don't think it was going to work out with him in New York. They did lose Braxton Berrios, who's a nice utility guy for them, and they also lost Mike White, but what does that really matter? They've got Aaron Rodgers at the quarterback position now. So I think this is going to be a team that we're going to expect to see a lot more of out of the in terms of fantasy next season compared to what we did last year. I will say, though, that this defense is really good, and I think that's going to sort of limit how much production we can really see from this team. A lot of people are super excited about Garrett Wilson being maybe even a top 10 receiver, top 5 receiver for some people this season, and I really do think Garrett Wilson is that talented, but I think that A, he's going to have a bit of a rapport with Allen Lazard, and B, this is going to be a team that honestly they're going to win enough games and be competitive in enough games where they're not going to need to really air it out the way you'd want them to for Garrett Wilson to really put up those gaudy numbers. But despite that, I think that Garrett Wilson's still going to be like a fringe top 10 receiver for me. I just don't think he's got that top 5 upside because his team's got too good of a defense to really find themselves in too many shootouts this season. Aaron Rodgers, he's going to be like a low-end quarterback one for me. This is a really good receiving core. It's the best he's had in the last 2 years, obviously having lost Devontae Adams last offseason. But as far as the rest of these guys go, I think Allen Lazard maybe can slot in as like a weekly flex option, and nobody else in terms of the wide receiver position is going to be super exciting for me between him and Garrett Wilson. That's probably all you've got. And then at the running back position, I think Breece Hall is going to be an absolute monster this season. I love Breece Hall. He's super talented. I think he'll probably start slower this offseason and then get better as the season goes on just because he'll be coming off of that injury. But he's a guy that I think I'm going to have a lot of this season in fantasy. He's just super talented. I think a lot of people are going to be worried about that injury, and he's young enough and talented enough. I think he's going to overcome it. But yeah, this is going to be a team that's going to be honestly a playoff contender. They're in a really tough division, which honestly might help them from a fantasy perspective because they, I mentioned they might not find themselves in many shootouts, but any game with the Bills or the Dolphins certainly can become a shootout. So they got at least 4 of those there this season, and I mean, their team's not good enough that they're going to stomp people, so it's certainly possible that they have to at least keep up with other teams. And I think that in general, this is a huge upgrade for everyone involved, obviously, over Zach Wilson. Aaron Rodgers got a chance to be the best quarterback the Jets have had in 20 years just because they've been absolutely abysmal there. So it's night and day for all the weapons in New York. And then Aaron Rodgers, I think it's pretty lateral for him. He's got a little bit more upside because of the increased quality of receiving weapons, but not a whole lot in terms of benefit for him. And then I know I didn't talk on this or mention this because they're not in the AFC East, but I do want to take a minute to talk about the Green Bay Packers as well. I think Jordan Love's going to be a perfectly fine quarterback for them. I think that they're really going to have to lean on the running backs again this season. Their defense is good enough to maybe make them like around a 500 team. They have been mocked pretty often as a team that could end up with JSN. For me, that would really just hurt Christian Watson. I think you'll have JSN then being like the PPR guy, the possession receiver, and then Christian Watson being the guy that takes the top off of defenses. And I think that both those guys would then just sort of slot in as like in between wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 3 territory. And obviously there's no tight end in Green Bay. Running backs will both be like running back 2s for me, and then this is going to be a team that's probably going to end up around 500 this season. So, yeah,